to Tenant Action Today, brought to you by Met Council on Housing, the citywide tenants union. If you believe in tenants' rights, if you want to help preserve the affordable housing we have and expand the supply of affordable housing, you should find the next hour to be of interest. Among other things, you will be able to call in and ask a question about a problem you're having with your landlord or about your rights as a tenant and get an answer from a tenant attorney right here on the air. You will also get some of the latest news of interest to tenant advocates. Finally, you will learn how you can help the campaign to restore our rent protection laws, which are due to expire in a few short months, 11 months as a matter of fact, and are in danger of being phased out. My name is Michael McKee. I'm a board member of Met Council on Housing and the treasurer of the Tenants Political Action Committee. Throughout the next hour, we're going to give you information about sources of information and advice for tenants. Sometimes this will be on the bottom of the screen, sometimes on the full screen. You might want to get a pen and paper so you can write them down as we go along. We have two special guests for this program, Harvey Epstein and Shayla Garcia, the two tenant members of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. Welcome, Shayla, and welcome, Harvey. I hope you guys have gotten some rest since the Rent Guidelines Board season is over. It's a very intense 3 months. The first meeting was when? In March, I believe.
That's correct.
Late March. And then the vote was late June. So it's all telescopes into a 3-month period. How do you feel? How do you feel about it? Shayla, this is your first year. Harvey, this is your third year, I believe. Was this your third year on the board?
It was my second year, Mike.
Second year, okay. I couldn't remember. Okay. And this was your first year, your maiden voyage. How do you feel, Shayla?
I feel excited. I am excited to be able to represent tenants in the way I did, and I think that tenants came out in numbers in a way that was really amazing and rejuvenating for me as a tenant advocate and organizer. Yeah.
The turnout was absolutely amazing. We haven't had turnout like that in many, many years. Literally hundreds of tenants showed up there were 4 public hearings in 4 different boroughs. And I went to the Bronx hearing, and there were like 350 people there. One landlord, 350 tenants. About, 100 of whom I think testified.
Right.
And how were the other hearings? I made the Manhattan hearing, but I didn't make Brooklyn or Queens. How did those go, Harvey?
Oh, I have to say that we had some huge victories this year, and I have to think that the first and foremost one was that we convinced the Rent Guidelines Board that we needed a hearing in all 4 major boroughs, and that we showed that there was a real interest in tenants that we had, as you said, Mike, 350 tenants in the Bronx, but in Brooklyn we probably had 250. In Queens we had 100, 150, and in every single borough in Manhattan we had 100. So every borough we were in, we had a huge turnout, and lots of people who wanted to talk about their stories, talk about their lives, and talk about the stability of their homes. And I think just to win that, from last year when we only had 1 hearing in Manhattan to this year having 4 hearings with huge turnout, was an amazing victory. So I felt really rejuvenated by all that work.
The most we have ever had is 2 hearings, one in Manhattan, usually during the day, and one in another borough, either Brooklyn, Queens, or the Bronx, in the evening. The board has never been willing in the past to have more than those 2 hearings, so that was quite a breakthrough. And I remember the landlord members were very resistant to this. They did not want too many hearings.
I think that was through the work that happened last year, right? Last year, it was a setup of pushing to make sure that we have, they said, no, we're not going to have an outer borough hearing. We don't have the budget for it. We don't think we can make it happen. And so people in the Bronx organized and had their own hearing, and 150 people came out to that hearing, 50 testified. And I think that was sort of a testament to what was going to happen this year, and people were rallied, and so like the movement sort of grew in a different way. And
yeah, and your organization, CASA, really was behind that hearing, I think. So.
Yeah, I have to say that CASA did an amazing job last year, and what they did was focus on, even though the Rent Guidelines Board refused to have a hearing, they said we're going to do our own people's hearing, and had actually at the time the candidate Mayor de Blasio came out to that hearing and talked about what he saw, talked about his concerns, and it really mobilized tenants to continue. He spoke publicly then about a rent freeze. It was the first time I think he said that. It was an amazing moment, and it really energized tenants in the Bronx to kind of catapult us forward.
And I think it probably had something to do with the fact that Bill de Blasio got elected. But that was that year. That was last year. Now we're this year. So we'll get back to this. Before we take calls, a few things that you should know about Met Council on Housing. First, Met Council runs a tenant hotline every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1:30 to 5 p.m. Tenants can call 212-979-0611 during those hours and get advice from a live counselor. Also, Met Council has a weekly radio program, Housing Notebook, on WBAI FM 99.5 on the FM dial. Housing Notebook is on the radio every Monday from 8 to 9 p.m. You can also listen on the internet at www.wbai.org. Finally, Met Council on Housing publishes the only tenant newspaper in New York City called Tenant Inquilino. Those who become members of Met Council receive the newspaper in the mail every month. An important point, Met Council on Housing is not and never has been affiliated with the Metropolitan Council on Jewish Poverty. They are completely separate organizations. Now, here are some brief news items and announcements of interest to tenants. First, Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced a 5-part plan to improve safety in 15 of New York City's most crime-plagued public housing developments. Together, these 15 account for 20% of all the violent crime in the city's more than 300 public housing developments. Next week, the city will begin to install more exterior lights and security cameras, and will start to remove sidewalk scaffolding that criminals use as hiding places. An additional 700 police officers will be assigned to the 15 developments. The police officers will conduct wellness visits to residents who have been victims of crime to make sure they have proper services and referrals. Finally, more than 100 community centers that provide youth programs for kids up to age 17 will remain open throughout the summer until 11 o'clock p.m. as a way to keep kids out of trouble. This initiative will cost New York City $210 million. Next, the 2 federal mortgage agencies known as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have issued a warning that they will not provide mortgage financing assistance to potential purchasers of the Stuyvesant Town Peter Cooper Village complex until a plan for preserving affordability of at least some of the apartments has been reached that satisfies both the Tenants Association and the City of New York. The current owner, CW Capital Asset Management, is trying to sell the complex, which contains more than 11,000 apartments. This pledge by the federal agencies will help prevent another predatory deal. Without Fannie or Freddie's help, any purchaser would have difficulty obtaining financing. Finally, the Rent Stabilization Association, despite its misleading name, a landlord organization, has called on Mayor de Blasio to cap real property taxes and water and sewer charges at 1% in the year beginning October 1st, when rent-stabilized tenants whose leases come up for renewal in the next year can pay as little as 1% for a rent increase. The New York City Rent Guidelines Board voted for rent increases of 1% for one-year renewals and 2.75% for 2 years. So how about that? The landlords want their real property taxes and water and sewer charges capped at the same amount that rent-stabilized tenants are going to pay. What do you guys think about the actual result? Do you think 1% and 2.75 was a victory? Do you think it was a defeat? How do you feel?
Sheila, I don't know. I mean,
don't all speak at once.
I think that it's twofold, right? I think that it was a victory in the sense of having really the lowest increases that we've seen in the history of the RGB. It's really exciting, but it's also not what we wanted. Tenants deserved and need rent freeze, and that's what we were advocating for, and we didn't get that. So it's kind of twofold.
So I also think it's really interesting conversations where I think the facts really outline why the rent freeze is appropriate. We talked about tenants' incomes, we talked about landlords' profits and net operating income. I mean, the facts really spoke to that. The RSA kept saying, well, costs have gone up by 5.7%, therefore we need a huge increase. But the reality is those aren't what costs went up. I mean, there's the income and expense data, which really shows that landlords' profits haven't, costs have not gone up and their profits have. And we have their net operating income continuing to go up. So all the facts really showed that rent freeze was appropriate. Now, saying that, I agree with Shayla that it was a victory that we got this 1 in 2.75. It's the lowest ever. That doesn't mean we're happy, we're satisfied. It means we got to go back and keep fighting for what we believe in. But we all have to take solace in what we got. What we won this year was a huge victory for tenants to at least not see the outrageous increases that we saw like last year, 4 and 7 3/4. We're seeing something that someone who doesn't see increase in their salary, a 1% increase in their rent is you can survive that. When you see no increase in your salary and you're seeing 4, 5, 6, 7% increases in your rent, you can't survive that. So we're seeing much more realistic increases, and I think that's something that we should look forward to hopefully working on over the years to come.
And it's interesting because while 1% seems like a very modest rent increase, and many tenants I've spoken to are very happy. They say, "Oh, great! 2.75, 1%. I mean, I'm gonna be happy." It actually adds up to a significant amount of money citywide, because the 1% alone translates to a transfer from tenants to landlords of $131 million. So that's not, insignificant, especially for landlords of rent-stabilized property who are already netting essentially 40 cents on the dollar. I mean, they're spending 60 cents of every dollar they collect running their buildings. Actually, they're netting 39.5, but we can round it up to 40 cents. Next year, it'll be above that. But I mean, they're getting 40 cents on the dollar for debt service and profit. That's an amazing net. And even the smaller buildings, they're not doing as well as the large landlords, but they are netting. They're not suffering. And the numbers don't lie. I mean, the numbers are right there.
It's funny because most landlords, when we ask questions about how they're doing and how the income is looking for them, no one would tell us, "Hey, what are your profits?" But one landlord did. She had a 6-unit building, and she said she makes $30,000 a year in profit from her 6-unit building. And so I thought about it. With 6 units, $30,000, she's making $5,000 per unit.
Per apartment.
Per apartment, right? Per unit. So if you think about it, the average rent's around $1,000, per month. So she's making 5 months out of 12 months of rent. 5 months of them go to her profit.
Probably the real estate lobbyist didn't give her the talking points.
Yeah, right. Because the talking points really said, don't answer that question.
Right.
Because we don't want to talk about profits. We don't want to talk about how much money we're making in this city. We want to talk about the crisis of affordability that we have. We don't want to talk about 54,000 homeless people. All we want to talk about is this number, 5.7% in increase in costs, which is not a real number. It's not the number that the RSA can really stand to. It's not what the Rent Guidelines Board talked about. It's not a real number.
Yeah, it's nonsense. I mean, it's from a study that everyone admits is flawed and not reliable. So, but they cite it anyway. So that's that's just the way it is. Some things never change. All right, now we have a phone call. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello. Uh-oh.
I guess they left
Sounds
us.
like somebody got disconnected or they
Yeah.
hung up. Okay,
Hello?
I guess we don't have a phone call. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, there was something in the paper about a lady losing her case at the Court of Appeals.
I'm sorry, say again?
A lady lost her case at the Court of Appeals on that 4-year battle. Or you're not familiar with that?
Well, you're going to have to fill us in, I think.
Oh, I see. I'm missing some points, and I thought maybe you knew the rest of it.
It's not ringing a bell at the moment, but if you give us a few details, maybe
she
we...
moved in, and the rent was very low before, but she waited, I guess, too long after that 4-year period. Oh, well.
You're talking about a woman who said she had a rent overcharge.
A rent overcharge?
Uh,
Are you talking about a rent overcharge case?
Yes.
Where she claimed she was paying too much rent?
That's right.
Okay.
And they said that what happened before, the Court of Appeals said that didn't matter. Oh, dear. Well, what's the use? Nobody knows about what I'm talking about. Well, it was in the paper, though.
Well, I didn't read about it. Harvey, do you know about this case?
I don't know what particular case she's referring to, but there are cases all the time where basically the statute says you generally can't go back beyond 4 years in looking at rent overcharges. But there's situations where there's fraud that were committed the courts can go back beyond the 4-year period. And it sounds like what you're saying is that the court found that she couldn't go beyond the 4 years because there was no fraud.
I see. Okay. What a shame. I should cut this out and send it.
Well, this is the problem. In 1997, the legislature and Governor Pataki amended the laws to incorporate a 4-year strict limit on how far back you could go to challenge a rent overcharge.
all right.
So it meant that landlords could overcharge and hope that no one would file a complaint within 4 years, and then the tenant is stuck. Now, there have recently, in the last few years, there have been a number of court cases holding that where the tenant could show some kind of fraud, that the landlord actually created a phony tenant, that they, created a series of phantom tenants or whatever, then you could reopen these cases and go back beyond 4 years. But absent of finding a fraud, are you aware of any cases that would allow anyone to go back more than 4 years and absent of fraud?
I haven't seen cases really that go beyond 4 years unless there's fraud, and that's really where the case law has opened up in the fraud context. I don't know about you, Shayla.
I haven't seen
Here,
anything.
here, I found the article. Oh, my goodness. It was in, it was in the Daily News today. Tenants' rent bid is nixed.
I looked at the Daily News. I must have skimmed over
Daily
it.
News, page 36.
Okay.
When you get home, if you can look that up there.
I probably didn't get that far.
Okay.
I was writing the script for tonight's program.
Candy was the owner. David Paul was his. Said the judges has the right decision. Under the ruling, whatever happened before then could not be examined and cannot be examined. That's his lawyer.
That's the general rule. And to get around it, the tenant needs to be able to demonstrate that the landlord engaged in some kind of fraud.
See, the rent skyrocketed on her one-bedroom apartment several years before she moved in, jumping from $800 up to so on and so forth. And then the rent climbed to $2,000 in 2007, the year she moved in.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, there was a dispute there that the that other Court of Appeals voted 7-0 in favor of the landlord. Yeah. So nothing can be done on that kind of a situation.
Well, that's the highest court in the state. So I doubt that there's a federal issue that she would be able to go to the Supreme Court on.
And this is really a fact-driven analysis. It's what are the facts that can prove fraud, and if she didn't have anything, or if the landlord had records to prove that they actually had those increases and there was actual cost.
The owner had justified his opinion that his rent hiked because he put in such and such amount of money.
Yeah, so that's what the law says. As Michael continued to tell us, the rent laws are up next year in 2015. There's an opportunity to change those provisions around whether individual apartment improvements, and the landlords can forever collect those increases, but that's what the law is today.
Letitia James has filed a amicus brief.
She filed one, you mean?
An amicus brief.
Yeah.
In the tenant support.
Okay.
It does not give guidance to DHCR on how to investigate when tenants raise claims about fraudulent overcharges.
That's unfortunate, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. Thanks for calling.
Okay, bye-bye.
So, interesting. One thing that was interesting to me was how the vote for the 1% and the 2.75% transpired and who voted for it. It passed 5-4, and you guys voted no, right? You voted against it.
Yes.
Who voted for it?
So
A rhetorical question.
Yeah, the 2 landlord representatives voted for it, and 3 public members voted for it.
Why would the 2 landlords vote for something as low as 1%? That really was astonishing to me.
Right. I think that it was a combination of they knew that if they didn't get they either get a 1% or 1% for 1 year and 2.75 for a 2 year, or they were going to get a rent
zero,
raise.
right?
Yeah, for at least a 1 year and a 3% for a 2 year.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually think was a really interesting part of that conversation with them was then not only did they vote in favor of it, but they proposed it as their first vote. That they made a decision that this is what they wanted to do. Now we don't even know how any of the other votes would play out because that was the only vote that happened.
That was the first motion.
First motion, first
The tenants
vote.
went first the year before, so this year the landlords went first.
And that was the play they made.
And that was the play they made. Usually what happens at these final votes, and by the way, we had a huge turnout on the final vote.
Yeah, it had to be 500 people in the room.
I think at least 500 people. We haven't had a turnout like that in many, many years. But usually what happens is that the landlords make a motion for some outrageously high rent increase, which fails 2-7, with only the 2 landlords voting for it and the 2 tenants and the 5 public members voting no. Then the tenants make a motion for 0 and 0 or for a rent rollback, which fails by a vote of 2-7, and with only the 2 tenant members voting for it. And then in years past, there would often be 20, 15 years ago, there would be several motions before something finally passed. But starting with Bloomberg and Marvin Marcus as the chair, and this certainly continued under Jonathan Kimmel as the chair, the whole thing got very scripted. The landlords had one motion which failed 2-7. The tenants had one motion that failed 2-7. And then the chair would make a motion which would pass 5-4, with the 5 public members voting for it in lockstep, clearly a done deal. And the 2 tenant members voting no because it was too high, and the 2 landlord members voting no because it was too low. This year, that whole script went out the window. It was interesting.
Well, I think it really recognizes a change in what people see the Rent Guidelines Board, the importance of the Rent Guidelines Board, and the attention it got. We had so much attention.
So much media this year.
So much media. Our 4 public hearings, our final vote, it was in all the papers. We were on networks all over the city. People know about the Rent Guidelines Board more than ever, which I actually think plays out really well for tenants in this city. They know they have a voice. They know hundreds of tenants came out and voiced it, and they know they were this close to a rent freeze. So that if people come out and talk about the facts and give us information and tell out their story, we will have that information for next year and moving forward.
And I think it shows that, like, this year it was a little different than the previous years, where people were looking at the facts. As people on the board were trying to make a determination, and I think that was what you saw, that struggle. And so I think that it's really different from the previous years, and it's also hopefully going to continue going forward. And that tenants' voice and perspective and ideas are going to be pushed with the facts backing them up, right? And that the years to come, we're going to hopefully see better turnout and better turnout as far as like the vote also.
I think tenants were enthusiastic about showing up this year because they were anticipating getting a rent freeze. And I think that had a lot to do with the buzz that we were going to get a rent freeze, had a lot to do with, in years past, we've had real hard time just convincing tenants that they should show up. People would say, I'm not going to that ever again. It's all fixed. It's a done deal. No matter what I do, it's not going to make any difference. So for many years, it was very hard to mobilize to get tenants to go to Rent Guidelines Board hearings, and that changed this year. So let's hope we can build on that. All right, now we have another phone call. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hey, Michael, how you doing? And congratulations. You guys did a great job. I was at one of the hearings with my class, and they saw democracy in action, finally.
Which hearing did you attend?
The one in Manhattan down at Bowling Green.
Right. That was the first vote, yeah.
Right. It was really great. And I think the whole, once these public members that are appointed by Bloomberg are gone, I think then you guys will have much more weight, because there's obviously some kind of, joker in the deck that go to 5-4 like that.
Well, I mean, certainly the 5-4 vote for the 1 and the 2.75, 2 of those votes came from 2 public members who were appointed by Bloomberg. Their terms are up at the end of this year. And a 3rd vote came from one of the landlord members. Of course, the landlord member would have voted for it probably anyway. That was their strategy. But her term is up at the end of the year. So we will certainly have 2 new public members next year. I would hope that would make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we've learned from all the new members is that they're smarter people. They've thought more about these issues. Even the new landlord representative, Sarah, I really respect her. She's smart. She's thinking about these issues. She's being creative. I really think she was, for a landlord representative, she was a really good appointment. She's a smart woman, and I'm happy to continue to work with her because I think she'll be someone we can work with. We may disagree at the end of the day what the numbers should look like, but we can be respectful and collaborate and talk and ask interesting questions. So I think what de Blasio's really done is made really good choices about who he's appointed, and hopefully he will appoint new public members who are smart and thoughtful as well.
And people hopefully that are going to keep that dialogue going, right? And I think that that's something that's unique and different from what I understand and what I've been involved in the previous years with the RGB, where, you would sort of be talking to the tenant representatives who were already on your side. And this year, it was really, people were receptive. People's testimony really sort of made people on the board think about what their options were and, really consider what this would mean and the impact, and really try to look at both sides of the coin, which is, I think, a little difficult to do when you're on the board and you're sort of representing a side. But I think Sarah did a good job looking at the facts and really considering and weighing what was going on, and so did other public people on the board.
You really notice it with the questions that people ask. Like the new public members asked lots of thoughtful questions. The new chair asked lots of thoughtful questions. And really the older members, the members who are old Bloomberg appointments, really, I don't think they asked one question in the 5 hearings. So
well, that was the syndrome. I mean, the syndrome has been always that the 2 landlord members and the 2 tenant members do a lot of talking. It's like a fencing match almost between the landlord members and the tenant members. The public members sit there like bumps on a log, never opening their mouths. That was very different this year. It certainly made an impression.
And I think that makes an impression, right, on how people feel they interact with the board.
Yeah.
I think that when you go and you know that they can vote as a block and that you're speaking to them, and then all of a sudden nothing is sort of happening, I think that it makes you feel like you're not really talking to people who are listening and who are open to that. And I think that, having public members who are asking questions and sort of receptive to what you're saying makes you feel like you want to be in that dialogue. And so I think that the turnout might grow because people who live in buildings are going to tell their friends and their neighbors, listen, they're really there to listen to us. They really are going to take our suggestions into consideration when they make their determination.
I have to say the new chair is really excellent. I mean, I didn't agree with the 0 and 3. I thought it should be 0 and 0, but she did try for 0 and 3%. But she ran the meetings in such a professional way, and she was so even-handed, and things like delaying the hearing when people couldn't get into the room because of the security and these ridiculous Homeland Security wearing bulletproof vests and tasers and pistols,
Right.
And she delayed the preliminary vote for an hour because people were lined up outside and couldn't get into Bowling Green. Now, I don't think a previous chair would have done that.
Yeah, I have to say that I know both Shayla and I have a lot of respect for what Rachel did this year. She came in after the hearings had started. We had a couple of public meetings already. She just stepped right in there. She took charge. She kind of moved the agenda forward. She asked smart, thoughtful questions. She really listened and met with people and heard their concerns and responded appropriately. I think she took a real leadership role, and I think the city is really lucky to have her as the new chair of the Rent Guidelines, where she was really calm and thoughtful and really helped things move together really well.
And she was respectful to everyone, which, we've had too many years of chairs of the board who are rude to tenants. Right. I mean, it's just really
it's interesting, Mike,
very different.
Because tenants said at some of the public hearings, they were like, I really appreciate that you're looking and listening and talking to us. But some people didn't really, they said, well, there are a couple members who aren't listening. And it was clear that the new members were all thoughtful and listening. Some of the older members weren't. And that tenants really felt that.
Yep. Okay. Now we have another
Michael,
call.
Can I call you?
Oh, no, sorry. You're still on the air.
Yeah.
Let's hear what you have to say. I didn't realize you were still there. I'm sorry.
No, I thought it was great, and I think that, as you know, for many years, the landlords have been, running amok, and finally it looks like some equilibrium is being restored. And I think it was just a great job, great organizing. And I know you guys are giving credit to the tenants for showing up, and the tenants are giving credit to you guys for doing what you did. So I think that's a good thing. And, I just hope that, it continues, but I guess we'll see. I wanted to ask you, could I call you offline at Met Council about Penn South? Because I know
Sure.
a couple of shows back you had mentioned something about it, but you didn't really want to talk about it. Okay. But great job.
I'm not sure what I might have mentioned. That we might have had a news brief about the bill to continue the tax benefits for Penn South
this
for
was
50
something
more
about
years.
The whole process of getting in and stuff like that, and that,
You mean
But
how?
you didn't seem like you wanted to talk on the air about it. So
This is not ringing a bell. Maybe I'm having a senior moment. I don't remember that call. You mean about getting on the waiting list, or?
About various issues about
Call Met Council, absolutely.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot, and great job, all three of you folks, and everybody else, chairperson, everything. Thanks again.
Thanks for calling.
Okay, take care.
I don't remember that call at all.
A lot of
I'm not
calls.
saying it didn't happen. I just don't remember it.
Yeah.
It might have been a night when I wasn't hosting. So, okay, now we have another call.
Yes, hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm calling about Section 8 downsizing on senior citizens.
Okay.
And I've been living in the building for 40 years. I have my son, it was two of us, but now they want to downsize me. But they gave me a form. I'd like to know, do you know about this form? The form is requesting for a reasonable accommodation, and it was three forms. Request for accommodation verification form. Could you explain these forms to me and what the purpose of them?
Before we do that, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is this a former Mitchell-Lama building?
Right.
And do you have a tenants association?
Well, yeah.
Okay. You can't fight this kind of thing alone. You need to fight it as a group. And this is a big, big campaign citywide. There's a citywide group called, I can't remember what they call it now. But there is a citywide group trying to stop this. And you should be working with your tenants association, and your tenants association should be working with the citywide group.
Now, these forms, they asked me to take to my primary doctor to have filled out.
Okay. Are you familiar with these forms?
I mean, I have to say this was a huge victory that this campaign got, even though we still are trying to fight the downsizing. What we got the city to agree to, HPD to agree to, was to make sure that people who needed reasonable accommodations, people who had issues that they couldn't downsize, could then get information to HPD to prevent the downsizing from happening. So, you have some medical issues that require you not to downsize.
Disability.
You can exactly.
Disabled.
Exactly. So that information you can provide to HPD, and HPD then can use that information to decide whether they're not going to make you downsize. Now, we still want to stop the whole policy. And we think downsizing right now isn't good public policy because, first of all, it's unclear, whether this is a budget issue that's 2 years away. So to force people to downsize now for an issue that's 2 years away is questionable.
But now, remember years ago, if you had 2 or 3 children, the boy had to have a room, the girl had to have a room.
Right. That's right.
And now they're stacking everybody together now in one bedroom.
So if you have adult children who are living in your household or minor children living in your household, they have to have their own room. The real
that still exists?
What?
But from what I understand, that doesn't exist anymore.
No, that's really what they're talking about is like you're being a single adult living in a 2-bedroom.
No, but I met friends at Section 8 saying they had to downsize with their daughter and 2 sons. They wanted to put them in one bedroom.
Yeah, what I've heard is depending on the age of the children, whether they're adults or minors, and the age of the minor children, some people may be asked to downsize or not. The question you had was really, can I ask for a reasonable...
Right, well, I understand my question is different, but I'm talking about, I didn't know the law had passed where 2 or 3 people could sleep in the same room or either in the living room. That's what's going on now.
Well, that's not what the state of the law is right now. That's what you're saying isn't the law. The law basically says, you need to have an apartment appropriate for your family size. And what we're seeing mostly for downsizing is you live in a 2-bedroom apartment and you're a single adult, but you have, you know, your son who comes every other weekend to help you. You have family members who stay in that other room because you need assistance.
Right.
And
Or
those
home
are
health
reasonable
care aid.
accommodation, health care. Those are the reasonable accommodations that people are asking for so they don't have to downsize. So,
Okay.
But if you have adult children or minor children who are living in the household with you, they, you know, depending on their ages, they get their own room. So I think what you're hearing may not exactly be the facts on the ground.
Oh, okay. Now these replication forms that the doctor has to fill out by the doctor. So you fill these out and by your primary doctor and take them back to the HPD.
Right. So yeah, if your doctor says, hey, she is disabled and she needs the second room for X, Y, and Z purposes, then you take that back to your HPD and they assess whether it's reasonable based on the request of the doctor to allow you to stay in the larger apartment.
Okay.
Make sure you keep a copy of the form.
Right.
Okay?
I thank you for your information.
Okay, but work with your tenants association.
Okay, I will.
All right?
Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling. You know, a lot of these tenants were downsized one time already, and now they're facing another downsizing. It really is so mean. I don't see the point here.
Yeah.
You know, and yet HPD is stubbornly sticking to this policy,
Right.
at least for now.
I mean, I think there's a little crack. I mean, I do think that they're stubbornly sticking to a policy, but since where they were 2 months ago to where they are now, I think they're much more open to hearing what the concerns are of tenants and much more willing to adjust
On
their
an individual
policy.
basis.
On an individual
Right, yeah,
basis.
right.
Now, I do think they have a budgetary issue in 2016, 2017, which could be large, but I don't know any government agency that deals with 2014 issues around 2016-17 budget issues. It's in some ways they think it's proactive, but I think who knows what the federal budget is going to look like then, and who knows if they're going to need to downsize, and why disrupt so many people's lives to do this if it's not necessary.
Exactly. All right, now we have another call. Hello.
Oh, hi, thank you.
Hi.
I would like a number from each of the panelists, a number from 1 to 10, 10 being 1970s Bolivia. How corrupt is New York City Housing Court? 1 to 10.
How corrupt is New York City Housing Court?
Yeah, 1 to 10.
I'm not sure corrupt is the word I would use. I mean, it's corrupt in a sense, certainly.
Well, think about the bias that exists in housing court.
Bias, absolutely.
98% of landlords are being represented. They're in court every single day, those landlords' lawyers. They know
They
have
run the place.
personal relationships with the judges, personal relationships with the court attorneys, personal relationships with the clerks. So if they need to grease the wheels because a friend needs something, hey, I got to get this case done, I got to do this, help me push this kid to trial.
I got to get to the golf course.
Exactly. So they have all the relationships. And the tenants on the other side, 98% of them are in court once on their case or 3 or 4 times on their case. They don't have those relationships, so they're just a number to the court. So there's an imbalance of power which exists in housing court.
So that leads you to a number of what?
Which leads to I think your argument that it's corrupt. I don't see it as a corrupt system. I think it's an imbalanced system that could be in better balance if tenants had a right to counsel, if tenants had equal participation, equal saying power in the housing court. So of the corruption, yes, I've seen corrupt judges. I've seen corrupt judges get off the bench, and I think of corruption it's probably like a 2. But of imbalance of power and power and oppression within our society, it's like a 9 or a 10. It's like really an imbalance of power, which is stacked against tenants. But in relationship to corruption, I think it's much lower.
Shayla, tell us about there's a right to counsel movement,
Right.
Where we are trying to get the city council to actually fund paying attorneys to represent at least low-income tenants in housing court. I mean, it's shocking that most people go into housing court without an attorney, have no clue. They don't even know what room they're supposed to go to.
Right.
No one tells them anything, and, you know, they get chewed up. Tell us about the Right to Counsel campaign.
It started 2 years ago, really, with a group of tenants in the Bronx, sort of trying to figure out exactly what was happening in the Bronx Housing Court. We didn't really have a clear understanding of exactly what was happening, and I think that we did some research and put out a report and sort of found a whole bunch of stuff. People didn't know where to go, didn't know what floor to go to, didn't know they had the right to interpretation in the court system, didn't know who was who in the court, all of the stuff that Harvey was mentioning just now. And so we saw that as a real true imbalance of power, and we wanted to see how we can sort of balance that out. And the only way that we found that to be was through every tenant having a lawyer, just like most landlords have lawyers. And so to really create a place where you can go and fight for your home in a way that is really powerful, just like landlords representatives or landlords attorneys are being calling tenants all over the place in the hallways and making and brokering all these deals. And
the tenant often think they don't understand even that this is the attorney representing the landlord.
Exactly. They think
sometimes
it's just
think
an
it's
attorney.
an attorney representing the court, when in fact it's the landlord's attorney.
Right.
You know, somebody comes up to you and says, "Mrs. Jones, you know, my name is whatever, can't we settle this, and let's see if we can't make some kind of arrangement here. The landlord will make the repairs, you'll pay the rent."
Exactly.
And then people get snookered into signing these stipulations.
Right, for money that they don't owe,
right.
for things that legally are not binding in housing court. And to even take it to a further extent, we've seen even, you know, landlord attorneys say, "I speak a little Spanish," or "I understand a little French. I'll try to explain it to you." And tenants are signing off on something that they can't read. And so judges are sort of saying, "Did you sign this? Did you agree to it?" And they believe that the landlord's attorney have their best interest in hand and are saying, "Yes, I did," and the judge signs off on it and people go home, and you know, 3 weeks later they're back in court because they got a marshal's notice. And so we're figuring that this would actually in the long run cost the city a lot less, because it would just be something you would have less people going through Bronx Housing Court, and you would also have less people in the shelter system or losing their homes, and it will also protect affordable housing in a way that we have been losing it massively. Because if tenants don't understand their rights and go through a system that is not protecting their rights in a way that's real, and then on top of that are losing their homes and moving from rent-stabilized apartment to other rent-stabilized apartments, the rents are just going higher and higher, and they can no longer afford those apartments when they couldn't in the beginning. And so I think that a right to counsel is more than just, you know, representing tenants and having tenants understand the system. It's going to go towards protecting affordable housing, towards, you know, making family stability a real thing. And it's a woman's issue. Most people who go to court are women, and most of the attorneys
with children.
With children.
Yeah.
And most of the attorneys are men. And I think that also provides and lends to different things to happen and occur in a court system that's already unbalanced and biased.
So this is all that comes down to a question of money, and the city council and the mayor did put extra money in the city budget this year for anti-eviction protection, for programs to prevent evictions and stuff, but we did not get funding to pay for right to counsel, and I think this is probably going to be a multi-year campaign.
I think so.
But I mean, it's just a question of justice. If you're accused of a crime and you cannot afford to pay an attorney, the court will appoint an attorney, and the city pays for it. But if you're faced with losing your home, you are not entitled to an attorney, and if you can't pay one, you can't afford to pay an attorney, and if you're low income and legal services or legal aid is too busy to represent you, and we know that programs like legal aid and legal services turn away the overwhelming majority of tenants who come to them who need help, it's a problem.
I mean, I would just add to this. I mean, at least from our lens of the Urban Justice Center, you know, we can assist one for every 8 or 9 people who walk in the door. So
So you turn away eight people out of 9 who come in your door.
Exactly.
That's really,
and that's because
that must be tough.
Yeah, we don't have the resources. It just doesn't exist. So that's one thing. The second thing is, it's not just, I mean, I think the gender issue, as Shayla talks about, is a huge issue. But there's a race component and an economic component. Like, we're talking about lawyers who are middle to upper middle class people who are mostly white, talking to low income, mostly Black and Latino tenants who are mostly low income. So we're talking about there's a gender issue because it's mostly men to women. There's a race issue because it's white to black and Latino. There's a socioeconomic issue. All the things we talk about power and oppression within our society are all wrapped up in housing court. And I mean, lawyers aren't going to cure everything. We need to organize. We need tenants to be organized. The Tenants Association, like you said earlier, Mike, we need movement building. That's really going to make a difference in buildings. But one thing that could help change the balance is the right to counsel.
Yep. So, anyway, now we have another call. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, you're on the air.
Okay, this is Edward from the Upper East Side. And
Hi, Edward.
I attended the RG meeting that was at the Immigrant Bank across from Tammany Hall.
Okay.
And I spoke there. While I was there, Tim Collins spoke, as he does every year. I must say, I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person, but it was so clear to me that he was dealing with such detailed issues. It was fantastic, but I wasn't understanding it. And what I'd love to get is somebody to sort of put in layman's language some of his points.
Well, he did have an op-ed in the Daily News last week, was it? I think it was last week, where he, in lay language, laid out the case for a rent rollback and why the Rent Guidelines Board had missed the boat and not only should have frozen rents, but should have actually rolled rents back.
Okay, so that was in the Daily News last week?
It was in the Daily News. I don't remember what day it was, but it was one day last week. It was before the 4th of July.
Super. Okay, I'll look for that. Let me also say, every year, the small poster landlords get up there and they give their complaints about need for capital improvements and their hardship. But of course, MCI's answers that for them for their capital improvement complaint. And as far as hardship, they have the remedy, don't they, to open their books and automatically or with proof get an increase?
I think to be fair, the hardship application under rent stabilization is not very useful. It's a 45-page application, but we could have a better system. But I think the bottom line is that they don't apply for hardship because they're not in hardship. I mean,
okay.
the numbers that the board has in front of it, and these are income and expenditure reports that landlords file directly with the City Department of Finance, show that even the smaller buildings they're doing quite well. On average, for the most recent numbers that we have, owners of rent-stabilized property in New York City are netting 39.5 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
That means they are spending 41.5 cents on running their buildings. That's everything, leaving 39.5 cents for debt service and profit. Now that's a pretty healthy net for
yes.
by any definition for any industry. Now that's an average, so some landlords are doing better. They're even doing better, and some are not doing as well. But even the small landlords, there are some buildings that are underwater. We don't know exactly why. What's the percentage of buildings that are distressed? 9%, something like that?
I think that the numbers we saw this year was low as 6%.
6%,
But also, I actually think some of the buildings that are underwater are the ones where private equity landlords or predatory equity landlords come in and pay too much for the building. You know, so the mortgage prices
they're
are
over leveraged.
They're over leveraged. The Stuyvesant Town argument. They paid way too much, so the value of the building isn't there. So what they do is reduce services and milk the tenants, milk the building, and then get foreclosed on. What we're seeing almost exclusively, the landlords who are sticking to buildings are all doing pretty fine. Some people are not doing well, but most of them, almost all of them, are doing well and making money and making profit and trying to stay in the industry. So, I mean, the only thing about what Mike said about this net operating income isn't that it's just 40 cents on the dollar, that it's increased every year for the last 8 years. So they're continuing to do better every single year. So that means they're making more money over the last 8 years.
I mean, yes, operating costs go up, but if rents go up faster, than operating costs, then landlords are doing better.
Right.
Right, and we're widening the gap of profit
Yeah.
every year that the RGB votes. So I think that that's also another point that Tim Collins sort of tried to make, was that we have continually just increased the profit for landlords every year, and this year, to make it right, we needed a rollback. And throughout one of the worst recessions that the country has faced, landlords were seeing increase in profits, and not only increase in profits, but they were also seeing that they received increases in their profits that they weren't merited, and tenants were struggling. We didn't see tenants' salaries go up 5%. We didn't see tenants' food costs go down. We saw everything soar, and tenants are struggling already. And so the RGB's sort of mandate is to look at both sides and make a fair decision to simulate what would be responsible so that both people are whole, both tenants and landlords. And I think for years they have sort of ignored that mandate and sort of just been saying, hey, let's just continue to grow that profit that landlords are having. And this year, I think, we wanted a rent freeze. We wanted a rollback, but we wanted at least a rent freeze, and we didn't get that. And we just widened that gap just a little bit more. And I think that that's something that we should also be conscious of, that we didn't get that rollback to make people whole to what they were seeing in 2008. And when we have more unemployment, we have more people homeless, we have higher costs of living in New York City across the board, and landlords are getting some more money for that.
And tenants' incomes have actually decreased.
Exactly.
When adjusted for inflation, people haven't had a raise in like 40 years. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, ordinary working people, or retired people, or everyone is feeling the effects of declining incomes. Everyone except landlords.
Right.
And we should also remember that the rent roll is only one form of benefit that landlords get from owning real property. Right. There are other benefits that you have from owning real property that have nothing to do with whether you collect rent or not. So it's not just the rent roll. I mean, they can finance. Owning an apartment building gives you a certain amount of economic power. You can go to a bank and get financing, for example. So this whole argument about the small landlords, it really is kind of wearing thin.
May I ask one more question?
Sure, Edward.
How do we put pressure or push the HCR or DHCR to deal more openly, more transparently, and more efficiently with MCIs? Without dragging us into details, my building got an 18% increase on an MCI after the landlord took 6 years to perfect his application, and we filed an appeal, which cost us $40,000, the tenant organization, and it's 3.5 years, and there's no word, and we're paying the increase.
This is an area that cries out for reform, not only legislatively but administratively. How do we do this? We have to change the law. First of all, we have to tighten the law, not only to make MCI rent increases temporary, surcharges, but we really need to get some procedural protections written into the law.
Agreed.
It's really the MCI unit at DHCR should be lined up against a wall and shot. So they're the worst. Okay. Thanks for calling, Edward.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling. In fact, bottom line is if tenants don't organize, they're going to rubber stamp the MCI application. So, okay, now we have another call. We're running short on time, so we need to make these calls quicker, okay? Hello?
Yes, hello.
You're on the air.
Yes, my name is Rose, and I live on the Upper West Side. And I guess it was a couple of weeks ago they had passed the law for rent stabilized. So I'm trying to find out who does that affect.
What law are you referring to?
The rent stabilized law that they just passed to lower the rent.
Oh, you're talking about the rent adjustments, the rent increases.
Right.
The 1% and the 2.75%.
Exactly.
That's what we've been talking about all evening so far. Those are the rent increases that go into effect on October 1st.
Yeah, but who does that affect? The people that signs the new ones?
If your lease comes up for renewal in the year beginning October 1st,
Oh, that's for them, because I just signed my lease renewal. That's why I just wanted to find out.
Well, did you take a 1 year or a 2 year?
I took a 2-year.
And when does your lease your new lease become effective?
Oh, well, it already did. My new lease just came effective as of June.
Well, then you paid 7 3/4 for a 2-year lease, and you'll be stuck with that for 2 years. And then we don't know what the board will do next year. They vote every June.
Oh, okay.
If you had taken a 1-year lease, you could have gotten a 1-year lease next year at 1%, or a 2-year lease at 2.75.
I know, but I had signed that lease back in February before this even happened.
Oh, so you didn't know what the numbers would be.
Right, I didn't know what was going on.
Is there any recourse at this point? No, right? She's stuck. I'm afraid you're stuck, Rose.
All right, I just wanted to ask
by the way,
anyway.
these are the 2 tenant members on the board that votes on this, and they voted against that, and they did a great job. So
The only thing I would to say to you, Rose, is Mike said it before, but so your rent might change based on our vote next June. So you have a lot of personal interest in making sure we do what's best for you and for the city. Come out to the hearings, get involved in Met Council or the other groups organizing tenants to attend these hearings, and tell us how this affects you.
How do I find out about when the hearings and stuff go on?
give Met Council a call. The number will be on the screen.
Okay, I see it.
Give Met Council a call and ask how can I get involved.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thanks for calling. Wow,
and thank you too.
Yeah. In a normal year, people ask me, should I sign a 1 or 2 year lease? I refuse to give that advice because it's Russian roulette.
Right.
You don't know what the board's going to do the next year. This time, it was clear that whatever the new numbers were going to be, they were going to be a lot lower. So I was telling people to sign a 1-year lease. I've never given that advice before this last year.
Me either, Mike. And I said I did the same thing.
But I can't tell you how many people told me I always sign a 2-year lease.
Yeah. And I think that's what unique it's also this year is that we're going to be hopefully organizing tenant associations and really turning out next year to have an effect on what that number looks like.
Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. Thank you both very much, and good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Tenant Action Today. We're on every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. Thanks for watching, and please tune in again next week.